My name is Julian Visser, as Tracy just introduced me, and I will be talking about how stochastic-driven uncertainty can improve long-term power price modeling. I work at ENECO. It's a Dutch integrated electricity company, and within my department, the fundamental analysis team, we make long-term power price forecasts up to 2050. And in these long-term power price forecasts, there's a lot of uncertainty. And we want to capture that uncertainty because that will help us better understand what assets we might invest in or how we can optimally shape our portfolio. But before I start talking for half an hour, I want to get a little bit of a feeling for the room and also show what, even in a room full of experts, what kind of uncertainty there already is. So starting off by a simple raise of hands, I'm old school like that. I want to know when you will believe that we achieve a net zero energy system in Europe. So let's start with the first one. It's before 2050, we will achieve a net zero energy system. Who believes this? Is there any positively mind attitude person here? I see one over there. Perfect, perfect. Oh, and the second one, that's great. So not many, but a few. And the second one, around 2050, our official goal, our official target. Who believes that we will achieve net zero by then? I see some people over here. Maybe 30%, 20% of the room. Okay, that's good to see that at least there are some people who still believe in the target. And in the by the way, I also believe that we'll do around 2050, will be net zero. And the last one is after 2055. Who believes this? So the pessimists of the room, or the realists, it's depending on what you say, right? Yeah. But good to know. So already in this room full of experts, we see a lot of uncertainty about something so simple as a net zero energy system. Simple, of course, it's not simple, but it is a simple question. And we already have a three-way divide. So, and I want to ask another question. And I see some more people coming in, so they can also answer this question with us. Simply, once again, by raise of hand. The second question is uncertainty. How do you include it? Do you include it at all? So I'm going to show 3 examples of how to include uncertainty, where the first one is include no uncertainty. So how do you include uncertainty in your long-term power price forecast? Well, you can just say, no, uncertainty is too big. I don't want to bother with modeling a million of scenarios. I just do one scenario, and that's the truth until 2050. Who in the room does investments based on one scenario? A show of hands once again. Okay, that's good to see. No one does it like this. It's nothing to be ashamed of. That's how we used to do it. We moved away from this. So the second one is, who uses some uncertainty? And you can think of like a multi-line power price forecast using multiple scenarios, such as a low, mid, high, or for example, with Energy Exemplar, they include global ambition, national trends, and deviate from that. Who makes long-term power price forecasts using a multi-line power price forecast? Okay, I see most of the people in the room raising their hands. Then the third question is, who uses full uncertainty? Power prices that go all over the place and hundreds of samples to be drawn from for your investment. Who does this actually? I see some people in the room. I guess you should go to the other room because you're already doing it, right? So no, but that's good to see that we're not the only ones here. And I hope that maybe after this presentation, I can meet up with some of you and hear how you do it and how we can learn from each other. So now let's hop into the presentation. I'm going to talk about 3 major things. So why do we at ENECO use uncertainty in power price modeling? That's an important question to ask. Secondly, what uncertainty does ENECO include? And lastly, we're going into how we can leverage this uncertainty for decision making and how it does change as well. How do we need to change decision making using a multitude of curves? So first, why we need uncertainty? Well, we suck at our jobs, basically. What you can see in this graph here is the Dutch day-ahead actual price, the materializing price. And I've drawn in black 46 different forecasts that me and my colleagues made. Usually we're long-term power price forecasting, so the short-term is not really our game. But as you can see, the gas spike, we got that pretty wrong. At the same time, after the gas price, after this big gas spike, we got this part pretty wrong as well. There's just an inherent uncertainty in power price modeling, which is very hard to capture. It's very hard to be absolutely right. So we need to include uncertainty in some different way without pretending that we're always 100% right. So how do we do this? Well, we go from uncertainty to optionality. So first I have a little bit of words here. There's uncertainty is a lack of knowledge about the future. It's the unpredictability of what the power price might become, and it gives a challenge in assessing probabilities of an asset making returns on its investment. And it is also difficult to make definitive decisions, because you always have to question, what if this happens? What if that happens? So moving away from uncertainty, we move to optionality. And optionality gives you the right, without obligation, to decide on what makes sense. It gives you flexibility to adapt to changes, things like a gas crisis you can include in your set of uncertainty. And it gives you also to choose what is best based on evolving events. If you already created a set of hundreds of curves, and you see the world is developing towards a certain subpart of that set, you can disregard 50% of your prices and move and be quite iterative in your approach towards the future. Okay, so that's nice in words, but what does it look like in a picture? So I tried to explain it, and let me take you through what you see here in the graph. So I'm going to take you through the 3 examples that I showed at the start. Ignoring uncertainty, going through multiple scenarios, and going to full stochastics. First of all, you have the one scenario. It's called S1 here. Over time, it is a power price forecast at whatever the price might be. If you then look at your project IRR, so your return on investment for a, let's say, solar business case, you have a hurdle, and your scenario might meet that hurdle. Well, you're happy, you're going to build a solar plant. If it wouldn't meet the hurdle, you wouldn't build the plant. So you want to have a little bit of more knowledge on this one line. Okay, so that's why a lot of you in the room move to multiple deterministic scenarios, where you can include already some uncertainty about the future, which is inherently quite uncertain. And you can move through, for example, to 3 scenarios, where 3 of your scenarios might diverge in power prices and might also diverge in what the return is. And that also is also reflected in whether you're going to meet your hurdle rate, yes or no. In this case, scenario 1 and 2, they will meet the hurdle rate, but scenario 3 will not. So that provides you some insight into the uncertainty. The nice thing of moving to the last part, the stochastics, is that you can make something called, or you can make a distribution. You can make a distribution chart. So instead of having 3 scenarios, you have those 3 scenarios plotted here. You do, let's say, 100 runs, and you could draw percentiles from those runs. So you have a P5, a P50, a P95. From those hundreds of runs, you can evaluate your project across. So let's say you have 100 runs, you evaluate what your return on your investment would be for run number 1. And you do that 100 times, and you can make this nice distribution chart, where you can see that, for example, where skewedness in your return on investment, depending on what your power price development might be, could pop out of it. This could look just like a normal distribution, but this could also be a skewed distribution in, for example, a battery case, or in, for example, a solar case. It depends from case to case what this distribution might like, using the same underlying stochastic power price set. So how do we then create these hundreds of curves, and what uncertainty should we include? Well, you might already have some ideas, but I'm going to tell you which ones we use. And there's so much uncertainty to include that it's hard to decide on which ones to do. So what we do is we focus on not on all drivers, but we focus on what is most significant. What has the biggest impact in power price modeling in 2040, in 2050? What are drivers there that I can vary across, that I know that will have some variance, and will be the biggest drivers of volatility in power prices? So there are 3 ones that I'm going to mention and going to dive into today. So there's regulatory policies and technology development. You can think of how LCOEs might develop, or in Europe, are we going to go towards a more right-wing government in the EU? These kind of things have impact on how, what kind of assets will be built, what kind of subsidies will be available, and what the power system of the future will look like. Secondly, an important driver, which we're all familiar with now, is fuel prices. A gas crisis such as happened after the invasion of Ukraine might happen again in a more globally unstable environment. So should we include this volatility more accurately in the future as well, of such an event that might happen again. And lastly, the one thing that we all like, it's weather patterns. We're going to a variable renewable energy system, so sometimes there is wind, sometimes there's no wind, sometimes there's sun, sometimes there's no sun. This differs from year to year and also has a big impact on power price formation. So let's dive into these 3 topics, starting with regulatory policies and technological development. I mentioned some just now, but more important ones to think of are things as power demand as well. These are usually driven how policies are taking shape. The political drive behind the EU really shapes what the energy transition will look like. And on technological development, I've added this nice chart that I think most of you do know. It's the expected global solar capacity growth from, let me see, IEA, yes. You can see the update on the amount of solar capacity growth, that it was underestimated time and time again. And this is what we've seen happening with solar. There's this big solar PV expansion going on, this big solar boom. But it's something like batteries, that's going to be the next thing, where we underestimate how quick batteries do grow. And that's something you can vary across your scenarios, and it's going to be a big driver for your stochastic power price formation. So yeah, the solution becomes to not taking one scenario, not taking 2 scenarios, but taking multiple scenarios that you feed into your stochastic process. So we go from a scenario-driven analysis to create N scenarios. And that N can be anything. Depends on how many people you have working in your team. If it's a very big team, it can be a very big number. But yeah. Then the second one, fuel prices. And because I think most people like graphs, I'll first explain this. You see historic fuel prices of gas here. So in black, you see the actual realized historic power prices with the big Ukraine crisis spike. And in gray and the little colors, you can see modeled fuel prices, artificially created fuel prices. Uncertainty in fuel prices will shape volatility in future power markets. It is uncertain how much uncertainty is there going to be, and that's up for debate. But because we are in a world that is becoming less globalized, this volatility might be a permanent issue within this field. And then it's important to include this volatility across different fuel prices. You can think of gas, the obvious one, but still coal. It's part of the EU system until 2030 for most countries. CO2, green hydrogen, but also blue hydrogen. These are all fuels of the future, fuels of the now, that will be experiencing volatility. And that volatility will lead to power price volatility, and that will impact your asset cases. So, once again, we go to the solution, where we use stochastic processes to generate these types of volatile fuel prices, and we correlate them across, and we have our future fuel prices. So we're moving to the last input that we think is important, and that's weather patterns. And weather patterns are famously important because in a system that is increasingly dependent on variable renewables, your weather pattern volatility will drive power prices. If you have a sunny month in April in the Netherlands, we see it already, you have negative prices, you have 0 hours, etc. So your weather pattern volatility and your year-on-year weather is quite important. And one thing that I'm mentioning here that maybe should have been placed in the first part is behavioral patterns. Although your weather patterns might not change so much, due to climate change they will slightly, but your behavioral patterns to that weather does also change. And that's something you need to include in your uncertainty as well. And then lastly, obviously, climate change is of impact to your weather. We see a rising temperature, so what does that mean for power demand? What does that mean for solar profiles, etc.? So what we do is we create N weather paths based on a sufficiently sized historical climate change corrected data set. And so let's say we use the 1990 weather, and we map that to 2025. So the historical weather is mapped to the future so that we do not lose any correlation that happens between, for example, your wind generation and your solar generation and your temperature. But we do have a big, wide, volatility-driven data set in that sense. So, okay, this is nice. We have 3 inputs, we have 3 uncertainties, or within those inputs there are even more uncertainties, but now we need to combine them, and now it becomes a number game. So the number game, oh, I forgot, I implemented the joke here. So I was successful. With the weather systems becoming more dependent on, for example, solar and wind, I included a Greek god. Who knows which Greek god this is? No, it's the god of the sun. Yeah, exactly. So it's Helios. So maybe we should go back to our Greek ancestral roots and pray to the gods for good weather and low power prices. Or high, depends on who you ask. All jokes aside, there are some limitations to this approach, and there are computational limitations. So I'm going to give an example of what we deal with. And we're going to calculate the cost of solving the power price for all possible futures until in the region or in the period 2024 to 2050. Let's say we have 3 worldviews, so 3 scenarios. And we have 100 commodity price paths, so we multiply these 2 numbers, so we have 300 scenarios already. But we have 40 historical weather years, which can be mapped at random to any future forecast date. This leads us to multiply with a massive number, leading to this amount of unique power price paths, being unique that they have varying weather, varying commodity prices, and varying worldviews. Well, this is a little expensive to calculate, even with something like Plexus Cloud. This is very expensive to calculate. So this is not an option, but we are lucky because we can do a little trick. In fact, if you would calculate all of these paths, most of them would be very similar because there is weather volatility, but the impact on power prices might be from a day-to-day that the power prices differ, but on a year-to-year basis, the difference is not so much. So in fact, maybe even 1,000 of all of these prices will already cover the full set of potential future power prices. So in fact, we only run maybe 0.1% of all of these power price paths, and we already have the full power price distribution that might be possible in the future. This is a little bit up for debate on how you determine when you're there, but you can look at, for example, at P95 values. When is your P95 value stable? If you add, let's say, another 100 runs to the stochastic set, if it's stable, okay, then apparently we do not include any more volatility. So that solves our computational limitation. And then we're actually at an end product. It was a long road to get there, but we get there. So now we need to apply it in practice. And I don't know about your board, or maybe you're in a board. They don't like to see a lot of lines. They like to see certainty. They like to see one number. If you meet the hurdle, we invest. And simplification is key. Maybe us, data engineers or data scientists, they understand this huge set of numbers or of lines or of power prices, but it's uncertain it's unclear for maybe someone who's not this deep into material. So how do we simplify and how do we apply this? Well, there are many applications, but we do have to convince them that are good applications. There's some smart simplifications that you can make, for example, in investment decisions, where you can calculate, remember this picture I showed before? You can calculate this complete distribution, but we don't have to show the complete distribution. Let's say the complete distribution is this. We can calculate the average hurdle rate. Then we do include any upside or downside potential for a project. And at the same time, numb it down to one number that can be used in investment decisions. But at the same time, there are also other applications as well. You can think of your portfolio and how that portfolio behaves in one of the scenarios. So if a portfolio existing of solar and batteries, it can be the case that in certain forecasts, in certain power price forecasts, your battery assets might have a poor revenue, but your solar assets have great revenue. And the other way around, where you have poor revenue for your solar, but your battery performs quite well. And this will give you net effect on your portfolio and see what might be the next thing to invest in to have a better portfolio effect. And maybe one that's more fundamental or more in the short term, because we've been talking about the long term quite a bit, but we can challenge power market forwards. Power market forwards are quite notoriously, in my opinion, a technical analysis-driven market. But if we include a lot of uncertainty through all of this stochastic thinking, we might be able to challenge power price formation in 5 years' time. And of course, there are many more applications, but maybe you've already thought of some applications in your company. So to wrap it up, there are applications of this it is a huge data set that you create. You can imagine there's hundreds of power price forecasts that eventually you create. And you can numb this down, and the applications of this are numerous. With that, I would like to thank you for your time. And if there are any questions, feel free to either talk to me in the break, or I think we have 8 minutes left, so feel free to ask any questions now. Or online as well, that's also possible. I think there's a question right there. I think I went too quickly to the questions.
Thank you. Well, the microphone's now certainly inspired me to do some more modeling. I don't know about anyone else in the room.
Yeah, so my question is whether do you look at the correlation between, so you had fuel prices and weather, do you also look at the correlation between the two?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And how easy then, a follow-up question, how easy, do you do it for one country or you expand to multiple countries? Because then it, I guess...
We model Europe, most of Europe, I should say. Yeah. So it's a pan-European model. Yeah.
Okay, more questions? Oh, we have one in the front here.
Hi. Do you account for any outages in your series?
Yes. Outages, you said, right?
Yes, outages.
Yeah, we do account for outages as well. And that's also a stochastic process, because Plexos can provide a stochastic outage process. So that's also part. It wasn't part of the things I mentioned, but because it's automatically there in Plexos, we use it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. So how do you account for unknown distributions?
Unknown
Distributions.
distribution? What do you mean by this?
So you showed us a few distributions that you can put. Okay. So there are some unknown distributions. We've never seen them. We never experienced them. We don't know them.
Yeah.
So how do you account for them?
Yeah, so if it's really unknown or it's really unfathomable.
So fuel prices a few years back, they went to levels that we've never seen before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so it's an unknown. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we account for unknown unknowns?
Yeah, really good question. The unknown unknowns are the most difficult to cover. It's about what do you allow your mind to go to as a modeler. So do you dare to think outside of the box and see, this is the most difficult part of our work.
So stochastic distributions with unknown unknowns give you a wide enough range that effectively your results are useless.
Sorry?
So I was just saying that if you account for unknown unknowns in your distributions and you plot them stochastically in terms of outcomes, the range is so huge that the results are useless.
Yeah, so it's also the question of what is the probability of your unknowns from happening? If they're really small, it's not a matter, it's not important to include them. You need to include your things that will be unfathomable right now that have a probability chance of happening, because that impacts actual business. And then the ones that are really unlikely to happen, let's forget about those, because then, you're modeling forever without actually providing actual or useful insights. But yeah, this is really a difficult question. Like, when is it enough? When do we capture enough distribution, indeed?
Okay, we have a question here, and then we'll go over there next.
Yeah, thank you for a really good presentation, Leonard Ivanovic, Matt McDonald. So in one of the slides you said, I'm going to put a threshold, IRR, I'm going to show to the client average, I'm going to show P5, P95. How do you convince the client if the P5 is negative? First question. And another, more a hint for you, you can implement risk measures and then to practically squeeze your distribution, a probability distribution function, and this can be done in Plexus.
So the second part, I could question. It's
The
quite hard
the second part is that you can implement risk measures such as CVAR, and you can practically squeeze your distribution function can be done in Plexus. This is a hint for you.
That's good to know. Thank you. And then the first one, how to convince someone if there's a negative IRR. Yeah, that's a good question. That's not my area of expertise. And we're going to put it in practice this year. So we'll see some cases of this, and then we'll have to see how we're convincing those people. Do you have any suggestions maybe on how to convince people when there's a P5 negative IRR?
Yeah, you can squeeze it.
Yeah, we can squeeze it, yeah.
You implement a risk measure, you can squeeze it.
Yeah, so risk measure.
It goes above the threshold. You put the threshold P above there, and you squeeze it. So you're here
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to see this calls for some discussion. That's a good thing.
Create some controversy, I guess. Hi, I'm Konstantinos from WindGrid. I wanted to ask two questions actually. So first one, all these samples, do you generate them yourself, or do you ask Plexus to generate some of those? Because you mentioned uncertainty, perhaps you do that in Plexus, but the rest, I assume you create yourselves?
Yeah, so for your first question, indeed we create all of the samples ourselves because we want to keep complete control of what the inputs are.
The next question, I think you mentioned that you do, sorry, not to preempt your answer, how far ahead are you predicting prices?
So up to 2050 currently, and we're planning on going to 2060.
So for so far into the long term, I would presume that the worldviews are the most impactful
correct.
parameter there. And there's probably not a need for, or you tell me, that I was intrigued, you showed 100 different fuel prices, like that I wouldn't assume like you need to account for this volatility that far into the future. I would understand if it's like 5 years ahead, but if you're looking to 2050, what's the value, or if you've seen a value in having a big range on
so there is a value in the volatility, and that's mainly driven by storage opportunities. So for example, your battery cases, or I don't know, e-boilers, demand-side response. If you have more volatility in your power prices, they become more interesting to invest in, while if you have flatline power prices, they are less interesting, basically. So it depends on what assets you're modeling or you're interested in building, then such an approach becomes either more interesting or less interesting. See, there's a follow-up question.
No, just I'm just thinking that in practice, so you will have a long-term view, which probably includes only the different worldviews and a few more uncertainties, I guess. But then when you go to the short-term simulations, let's say, is that where you generate all of the uncertainties in the fuel as well, and so on, I would guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you. We've got time for one last question, if we have any more. I think, Julian, you're going to be asked lots of questions in the coffee break. I can see this. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Julian. That was really interesting and inspirational.